2017, Europe under pressure, the OSCE in a complex security environment. Yesterday we have had 4 amazing panels, and we expect today's talks and panels to be at least of the same outstanding quality. We will start with a talk by Roger Robinson on the economic and financial dimensions of hybrid warfare, followed by another talk by Sanya Gul on cyber forensics and attribution. As not just every minute counts, but every second counts, we will start right away. Please, Roger, the floor is yours. So, I have to find.
Yeah, no, we're good.
Where is your?
Yeah, it's right there. It's all queued up. Should be right there. Oh no, it was working.
Yeah, we have it here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Now it's.
Here we go.
All right. Well, thank you. It's good to be with you again today. I had the privilege of speaking to the group on panel 2 yesterday. I want to again express my appreciation to Hannes, to Niels, to the marvelous student organizers of this very high quality gathering and my opportunity to participate. I'm going to try to rocket through this presentation a bit, as I've got 15 precious minutes here and want very much to take a question or two, at least, if we possibly can. I apologize in advance for repeating some of what I talked about in yesterday's panel, but I thought a refresher course might not be a bad idea, and I just wanted to cut to the chase a bit, as they say, in trying to acquaint you with the nature of what we're doing in this topic of the economic and financial dimensions of hybrid warfare. In fact, when you look at hybrid warfare, and I think most of us understand the below the threshold nature of it today, we think as much as 40% or more is playing out in the so-called economic and financial domain. Yes, there's a military component. There's everything from cyber attacks to disinformation. I mean, it has a number of elements to it. But when you really parse it out and look at it, we think there is a major capability gap, or an understanding gap, however you want to put it, that encompasses this economic and financial side of the equation. Traditionally, the U.S. security community and those of our allies have looked at what they call counter-threat finance. That is, non-state actors involved in illicit activities of the type of terror financing, the money movements of organized crime, drug cartels, these types of smuggling. You can imagine that this is the classified world, and we're very alert, frankly, to that side of things. But when it comes to the upper tiers of the so-called threat finance food chain, that's where there is a very substantial gap in scrutiny and understanding. And when I talk about the upper tiers, I'm talking about the legal and legitimate international trading and financial systems that are being selectively abused, even hijacked, by adversaries and prospective adversaries in front of our eyes in the global markets as they pursue strategic objectives. And what do I mean by strategic objectives? Well, we're talking about the capture of strategic assets of countries, critical infrastructure, fostering dependencies in the energy sector and elsewhere, as we've seen the Russians and Chinese do very frequently. And what this does is, over time, incrementally, it reduces the freedom of action of allied countries, particularly smaller NATO member states, as well as non-NATO member states in terms of this region of the world. And so, as a consequence, we are faced with a situation where if it's legal and legitimate, and it appears to be purely commercial, it rarely, if ever, receives security-minded scrutiny. Yes, there is a committee on foreign investment in the United States that looks at deals in our country to see if they have national security implications, but that happens once in a blue moon, and it's just not really a very active portfolio, nor is it pursued very systematically. So we have a gap there, and we tried to do something about this by building an open source software tool called IntelTrack that tracks and maps visually every transaction of state-owned and state-controlled enterprises of Russia and China worldwide on a daily basis. Now that's what you have in front of you, is just a quick look-see with the Chinese in blue and the Russians in red, and these are done deals. This is the global footprint of China and Russia as it appears today, at a city-level view. Now, we break down this data, as you can imagine, by city, country, region, continent. I mean, there are lots of ways to slice and dice the data. But this is, in a sense, the most dramatic because it really gives you a clearer view. Look at the coasts of Africa and the Chinese. We all have heard about their predatory practices there, but this is a visual representation of it. We also provide alerts. Now these blink, they're actually blinking seismic dots that appear each morning on someone's IntelTrack map. And those are deals that right today we think are more strategic and security related than commercial. It's true that you have to differentiate between what is apparently a normal or at least semi-normal business transaction and those that frankly are on non-market terms and are designed to take deals, particularly critical infrastructure and high technology companies, and when they're privatized or whatever the opportunity in tenders, you'll see the Chinese and Russians very aggressively bid, and they'll offer terms and conditions that the West can't hope to match. This is routine, and it's very troublesome, believe me, to the Western business community and to allied governments, but there's not a lot that's been done. If you look at the history of alerts since 2011, it just gives you a sense of where we were of the view that we had more strategic issues at play. And so that you might recognize some of those regions pretty clearly. This is an evolution of the map of transactions as they appeared in 2011. And of course, this is what the same map looks like today. So this little drag line across the bottom that you can barely see allows you to just literally drag across every quarter over the last 5 years, and you'll see the bubbles or the dots moving around, which reflects the growth and evolution of the deals. This gives you a sense of the number of transactions, the amounts of money involved. I mean, we have lots of ways in which to view the data. This next slide, it represents pending transactions. Now, what do we mean by pending? Here, we're talking about market announcements. We're talking about the signing of MOUs. We're talking about deals that have not yet gone to contract. Now, why is that important? Obviously, when you're dealing with deals that are already under contract, they're very difficult to unwind. It can be done, but it's an unpleasant, messy undertaking, and it tends to get allied governments and others very upset, believe me. And so this is the opportunity that we view as an early warning exercise. These are deals that haven't, again, been signed up, but we think that there are indications in the open source that this is on its way to happening. And if you want to have a diplomatic intervention, if you want to even take stronger action and seek to actually interdict deals that are going to compromise, say, a smaller NATO member state, just as an example, this is a way to do it. Get it pre-contract if you can, and say what you have to say at this juncture. So the pending transactions, we think, are a very useful tool. In addition, we have controversial projects and transactions. Now, what you're looking at here, for example, is the global footprints of every Chinese state-owned or controlled enterprise that's engaged in the island building and militarization of islands in the South China Sea. Now, those islands, as you know, have been declared by the international community as illegal, and therefore, those Chinese companies that are contracted by the People's Liberation Army and are working for them, I mean, they're dredging, they're building the radar installations, the runways, the surface-to-air missile sites. You know, these are companies. And not only are they companies, they're some of China's largest companies, and they have, of course, an elaborate network of subsidiaries and affiliates under them. And this is what the global footprint of those corporate family trees looks like. Now, when you're thinking about, again, working for the PLA on a strategic undertaking that is implicating $5 trillion in annual trade through the South China Sea, you know, it's not very helpful what they're doing, putting it mildly. When you look at where these companies are doing business, for example, 2 of those companies are listed on the New York Stock Exchange. One of them has offices in 15 American cities. Another of them has just purchased our most sensitive drill rig services company some years ago in Houston, Texas, 100%, with no CFIUS or, you know, scrutiny or review. Another, CCCC, a huge company, is in the midst of trying to raise $1 billion in an IPO out of Hong Kong. But are they disclosing their illegal activities in the South China Sea? The answer to date is no. So right now, for example, legislation has been introduced into the U.S. Senate by Marco Rubio that is naming 28 Chinese companies and suggesting that if State Department verifies that this is the case, that they would be potentially subject to sanctions. Now, you can imagine even the threat of legislative sanctions raises the risk profile, the financial risk profile of these companies, and makes it a bit sportier to do business with them, particularly if they're raising money, for example, on your stock exchange. These are the kinds of circumstances that can disadvantage the Chinese, that they don't see coming, frankly, because to date they've had the best of both worlds. You can undertake strategic activities, you can hack, you can violate sanctions, you can try to take over militarily relevant technology companies, you can engage in activities like this with impunity. That is to say, it doesn't affect your global operations. I predict for you that that's going to start to change. I mean, this is 21st century warfighting of a non-kinetic nature, and it's coming to a city or country near you, would be my guess. Another controversial area, for example, is the Black Sea. We talked about that a bit yesterday, and the fact that lots of folks had ignored the issue that you have $1 trillion, at least estimated by ExxonMobil and Shell, offshore Crimea in the exclusive economic zone of Ukraine. And Russia has nationalized, read stolen, all of Ukraine's drill rigs, moved it into those waters, and is now beginning drilling operations of a resource that is by far the largest revenue stream that Ukraine could ever hope for its future. It doesn't have $1 trillion sitting anywhere else, I can promise you that. So when you think about the drivers for Moscow's annexation of Crimea, you usually don't see this little detail on the list. It should have been at the top of the list. Now, mind you, there's a list. There are other considerations, to be sure. But imagine neglecting a $1 trillion prize. Now, Russia is not just drilling off of Crimea, it's also drilling off the exclusive economic zones of Ukraine elsewhere. And there's already machine gun emplacements on those drilling platforms, and the Russian Navy is circulating those platforms because they view them, not surprisingly, as their sovereign territory. They took a page out of China's playbook that loves to think of their drill rigs as mobile sovereign territory that can be conveniently patrolled with their naval vessels. That's why they built the islands in the South China Sea, if you think about it. These are excuses, if you will, to expand their strategic reach militarily. And so when the Ukrainians have the temerity to approach their own drill rigs in their own exclusive economic zone with, say, a plane like recently happened on February 1st with an Antonov 26 transport plane, you get near their drill rigs and the plane was shot up so badly that it barely limped back to its base. Another ship that tried to patrol was also shot at by the Russians on January 27th. So in other words, we're not talking ancient history. This is happening now, and the shooting has started now. Is there any mainstream media attention to this? Well, do any of you know that this has been going down? So you can ask yourself the question as to why isn't this getting more press? We're predicting that in the next 12 to 24 months, you're going to see a sharp escalation in this crisis, and folks are going to be talking about the Black Sea every bit as much as they are the South China Sea. The problem here is that we have a NATO member state in Romania, and I'm afraid that I have to be careful on time here, but the Romanians have a lot of oil and gas offshore. If they're going to start to drill next year, best we know, and if they do, they could become energy independent of Moscow and take 2 or 3 countries with them in the region because they'll be a net exporter. Do we really think that Moscow's keen to lose that kind of leverage? No. Are they positioning to try to interdict Romanian drilling? We think so. So we think this is a military problem in the making of dimension. And you know they're already buzzing the U.S. Navy in our 6th Fleet in the Black Sea right now. That's small potatoes as to compared to what we can expect down the road. Now, there are lots of other analytics in the product, and this is just a representation of one road, one belt, one belt, one road, I'm sorry, of China. This gets a lot of press, but this is a visual representation of actually how it's evolving, transaction by transaction. These are, for example, a breakdown of Chinese and Russian defense exports. So you can imagine that we can represent the data in lots of different ways, and this is just illustrative of that. And so, in my remaining time, which is about 0, I would only say, and Raphael, I have you to thank for this, to end on a positive note. You know, we can fix this capability gap. That's what we're looking at here, in the hybrid warfare being waged against us by the Russians and Chinese, that today is largely uncontested for the very reason that I mentioned, that we think that if it's legal and legitimate, it's okay, and I'm here to tell you that it's not okay. Now, we, the West, the US, the Allies, dominate the global markets. We built the international trading and financial system. They're playing in our sandbox. We're not playing in theirs. When a company engages in security-related abuses, it's a asymmetric risk to their share value, to their corporate reputation. It's important to keep in mind. If you think of what the markets care about, they don't care about patriotism, they don't care about national security, and oftentimes they don't care about doing the right thing, with respect. They think that's somebody else's job. They do care about financial risk. They do care about corporate brand and reputation. They care about disclosure and transparency. They care about corporate governance. They care about reliable statistics. They care about rule of law. Well, guess who doesn't score very well on any of those fronts? And that's Russian and Chinese state-owned and controlled enterprises, which operate in largely a black box. So in conclusion, information is the coin of the realm. And if you elevate risk, you're going to make life more difficult for Russia and China. This is something we can do on a calibrated basis by turning up or down that dial based on their level of malevolent and belligerent behavior. It doesn't always have to be sanctions. In other words, you don't hear me talking sanctions. You hear me talking information. There's a big difference. And so this is almost post-sanctions. This is going to be the new domain of economic and financial warfighting on the planet as we view it. So I don't have time for questions, as it turns out, and I apologize for that. Probably too long-winded. But if you want to see a free version of IntelTrack, it's on rwradvisory.com. And pssi.cz, our think tank, likewise has some of this information if it's of interest. And we're always available to answer any questions. So many thanks for this opportunity.